The June sun beat down mercilessly on Adelaide Campbell as she stood alone at the altar of Eureka Springs' only church, the white veil covering her face doing little to hide the tears streaming down her cheeks. The small Arkansas town had gathered to witness what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but her groom, a man she'd never met in person, hadn't bothered to show up. The whispers around her grew louder as the minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity of humiliation. It was 1885, and Adelaide had traveled all the way from Boston after exchanging letters for 6 months with Thomas Blackburn, a shopkeeper who had advertised for a bride in the newspaper. Her life in the East had offered few prospects after her father's business failed, leaving her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The promise of a new beginning in the West had seemed like salvation. "I believe we must accept that Mr. Blackburn will not be joining us today," the preacher announced softly, his voice filled with pity that stung worse than anger would have. Adelaide clutched her small bouquet of wildflowers so tightly that stems snapped beneath her trembling fingers. She couldn't bear to look at the faces of strangers who had come to witness her wedding, now transformed into spectators to her shame. Just as she was about to flee the church, a deep voice cut through the murmurs. "Then she'll say her vows to me." The crowd parted as a tall man strode confidently up the aisle. Weston Stanton was not a man who went unnoticed in Eureka Springs. His broad shoulders filled out his black coat, clearly his best, but still showing signs of hard work. His dark hair was combed back, revealing a weathered face that spoke of days spent under the harsh sun. Everyone knew Weston ran the most successful cattle ranch outside of town, though few could claim to know the man himself. Adelaide stared at him in shock. Though they had exchanged pleasantries on the 2 occasions she'd encountered him since arriving in town a week ago, they were barely acquaintances. "Mr. Stanton, this is hardly appropriate," the preacher stammered. Weston ignored him, stopping just short of Adelaide. He removed his hat and held it respectfully over his heart. "Miss Campbell, I won't have you suffering this indignity. Blackburn's a fool and a coward. If you're still wanting to be married today, I'm offering myself as your husband." A collective gasp rippled through the church. Adelaide's mind raced frantically. The stranger before her, tall, imposing, and undeniably handsome in a rugged way, was proposing to save her from public humiliation. But at what cost? "I hardly know you, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You hardly knew Blackburn either, from what I understand. The difference is I'll show up when I make a promise." Adelaide's options raced through her mind: return to Boston penniless and disgraced, stay in this town where she would forever be known as the abandoned bride, or take a chance on this cowboy whose eyes held something she couldn't quite decipher: determination, certainly, but perhaps also kindness. "Why would you do this?" she asked, needing to understand his motives. "Because no one deserves to be left standing alone," he replied simply. "And because I've been looking for a wife myself, just never found the time to advertise." His honesty was disarming. Adelaide took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and made a decision that would forever alter her life. "Very well, Mr. Stanton. It seems I'll be saying my vows to you today." A murmur of approval rippled through the assembled townsfolk. The preacher looked between them uncertainly before nodding his acceptance of this unexpected turn of events. "Well then, shall we proceed with the ceremony?" The wedding was brief, both bride and groom speaking their vows clearly despite the unusual circumstances. When Weston lifted her veil and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips to seal their union, Adelaide was struck by the gentleness in his touch, so at odds with his imposing presence. As they walked out of the church into the harsh sunlight, now as husband and wife, Adelaide's heart hammered with uncertainty. She had just married a virtual stranger, a man she knew only by reputation and a handful of brief encounters. "My wagon's this way," Weston said, gesturing toward a sturdy vehicle hitched to 2 strong horses. "Unless you'd prefer to collect your things from the boarding house first?" "No," Adelaide replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "There's nothing there I need immediately. I packed my trunk this morning expecting to be leaving as a bride." A shadow passed over Weston's face. "And so you are, just with a different groom than you expected." He helped her onto the wagon bench with careful hands. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from town. It's not what you might have expected with Blackburn, but it's a good place. Solid." As they rode out of Eureka Springs, Adelaide felt the curious stares of townspeople following them. She sat straight-backed beside this man who was now her husband, wondering what kind of life awaited her. The rolling hills of the Ozarks spread before them, beautiful yet daunting in their wildness. "I should tell you," Weston said after they had traveled in silence for several minutes, "I'm not a man of many words, but I meant what I said in there. I'll keep my promises to you." Adelaide studied his profile, the strong jaw, the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor indicated. "I appreciate your intervention today, Mr. Stanton, but I don't understand why you did it." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Weston." "You should call me Weston now." He was quiet for a moment before continuing. "I saw you arrive in town last week, asked about you, heard you were to marry Blackburn." His hands tightened on the reins. "Never thought much of him. When I saw the church gathered but no sign of him, I knew what had happened. But why step in? Why marry a woman you don't know?" Weston glanced at her then, his eyes the color of the sky above them. "I've been alone on that ranch for 5 years since my parents passed. Been thinking about finding a wife for nearly as long, just never found the right moment." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Seems today provided that moment." As the wagon rumbled along the dusty road, Adelaide contemplated the strange twist her life had taken. She had come west seeking security and a fresh start. Instead of the shopkeeper she'd corresponded with, she found herself married to a cowboy she barely knew. Whether this unexpected turn would lead to happiness or heartbreak remained to be seen. The landscape changed as they traveled, forests giving way to clearings and finally to sprawling pastureland. In the distance, Adelaide could make out a sturdy 2-story house nestled against a backdrop of trees, smoke curling from its chimney. "That's home," Weston said, a note of pride in his voice. "Stanton Ranch. My father built it when this territory was still wild, added to it over the years. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Good land." As they drew closer, Adelaide could see that the house, while not grand, was well maintained. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and neat curtains hung in the windows. Behind it stood a large barn and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a few horses watched curiously from a corral near the house. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, waving in greeting. He appeared to be in his 60s, with a weather-beaten face and a slight limp. "That's Ellis," Weston explained. "Been with the ranch since before I was born. Helps me run the place along with 2 younger hands who are probably out with the herd right now." Ellis's eyebrows shot up when they pulled to a stop, and he got a good look at Adelaide in her wedding dress. "Mr. Stanton, this is unexpected." "Ellis, meet Mrs. Stanton," Weston said, helping Adelaide down from the wagon. "We were married today in town." Ellis removed his hat, revealing a shock of white hair. "Well, I'll be." He recovered quickly, offering Adelaide a genuine smile. "Welcome to Stanton Ranch, madam. It's about time this place had a woman's touch again." Adelaide managed a smile in return. "Thank you, Ellis. I'm pleased to meet you. Would you show Mrs. Stanton to the house while I tend to the horses?" Weston asked, already beginning to unhitch the team. "Of course, sir. This way, madam." As Ellis led her toward the house, Adelaide glanced back at her new husband. Weston was speaking softly to the horses as he worked, his movements efficient and gentle with the animals. When he felt her gaze, he looked up and nodded once, as if reassuring her that everything would be all right. The interior of the house surprised Adelaide. While not luxurious, it was clean and far more comfortable than she had expected. The front door opened into a spacious living area with a stone fireplace. Simple but well-made furniture filled the room and bookshelves lined one wall. "The kitchen's through there," Ellis explained, pointing. Mr. Stanton's mother was particular about her kitchen, kept it modern as could be for these parts. Upstairs are the bedrooms. The master bedroom's at the end of the hall been closed up mostly since his parents passed, but I had Mrs. Parker from town come clean it proper last month, just in case. He gave her a knowing look that suggested he might have suspected Weston was considering marriage. "Thank you for showing me around," Adelaide said. "It's a lovely home." Ellis nodded. "Mr. Stanton's a good man, madam. His father taught him well. He'll treat you right." With that, he excused himself, leaving Adelaide alone to absorb her new surroundings. She wandered through the house, trailing her fingers along the furniture. In the kitchen, she found evidence that someone, presumably Ellis, had prepared for their arrival. Fresh bread sat on the table alongside a pot of what smelled like beef stew keeping warm on the stove. Upstairs, she hesitated before entering the master bedroom. The room was large, dominated by a four-poster bed with a quilt in shades of blue. A dressing table stood beneath one window, and a large wardrobe occupied another wall. It was clearly a room meant for a married couple. The sound of boots on the stairs startled her. Weston appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. "Ellis showed you around?" he asked, remaining on the threshold as if uncertain whether he was welcome to enter. Adelaide nodded. "Yes, he was very helpful." Weston shifted his weight slightly. "I know this isn't what you expected when you came west. If you'd prefer your own room, there's another bedroom that would suit." It was my sister's before she married and moved to California. The consideration in his offer touched Adelaide. "That's very thoughtful, perhaps. For now, that might be best." Relief flickered across his face. "I thought you might feel that way. I'll move your trunk in there when it arrives." I sent one of the hands to collect it from town. An awkward silence fell between them. Adelaide was acutely aware that they were strangers bound by vows spoken in haste. "I should change out of this," she finally said, gesturing to her wedding dress. "Of course, I'll show you Sarah's room." "Then perhaps you'd join me for supper." Ellis made his stew, best in the territory, he claims. The smaller bedroom was charming, with floral wallpaper and a neatly made single bed. A hand-braided rug covered most of the wooden floor, and lace curtains fluttered at the open window. "It's lovely," Adelaide said sincerely. Weston nodded. "Sarah loved this room, cried when she had to leave it, even though she was happy to be marrying." He paused. "I'll leave you to get settled. Take your time." After he left, Adelaide sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation finally hitting her full force. In the span of a few hours, her life had been completely upended. She was now Mrs. Weston Stanton, mistress of a cattle ranch, married to a man she barely knew. Yet as she changed out of her wedding dress into a simple blue frock, one of the few practical garments she had brought with her, Adelaide couldn't help feeling that fate had perhaps intervened in her favor. Thomas Blackburn's absence at the altar had seemed like the end of her hopes, but Weston Stanton's unexpected proposal might prove to be a better beginning than she could have imagined. When she descended the stairs, she found Weston waiting in the living room, standing somewhat stiffly by the fireplace. He had changed as well into a clean shirt and trousers, his hair still damp from washing. "You look nice," he said, the compliment sounding genuine if a bit awkward on his lips. "Thank you, so do you." He led her to the kitchen, where places had been set at a large wooden table. The stew was indeed delicious, rich with beef and vegetables. Fresh bread and butter accompanied it, along with a jar of preserved peaches for dessert. "Where is Ellis?" Adelaide asked, noticing they were alone. "He eats with the other hands in the bunkhouse most nights. Said he thought we might want privacy on our wedding night." Weston's cheeks colored slightly. "I didn't correct him about our arrangement." Adelaide nodded, focusing on her food. "The stew is wonderful. I'll tell him you said so. He takes pride in his cooking." Weston seemed to relax slightly as they ate, the silence between them becoming more comfortable. "Tomorrow, if you're willing, I could show you around the ranch. It's a good time of year to see it. Everything's green after the spring rains." "I'd like that," Adelaide replied. Then, gathering her courage, she asked what she'd been wondering since leaving the church. "Weston, what exactly do you expect from me? As your wife, I mean." He set down his spoon, considering her question carefully. "I expect you to make this your home if you can, to help run the household. Beyond that." He met her eyes directly. "I know this isn't a love match, Adelaide. I won't demand what you're not ready to give, but I hope that in time we might build something real between us." His honesty was refreshing after the pretty lies Thomas had written in his letters. "That seems fair. I'll do my best to be a good wife to you. A small smile touched his lips. That's all anyone can ask. That night, as Adelaide lay in Sarah's bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the occasional neigh of a horse, the creaking of the house as it settled, she contemplated the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west seeking security and found herself in circumstances she never could have imagined. Yet there was something about Weston Stanton that inspired trust. Perhaps, given time, she might find happiness in this unexpected marriage. The following days established a rhythm to their new life together. Each morning, Weston rose before dawn to begin work on the ranch. Adelaide quickly took charge of the household, preparing meals, learning from Ellis about the workings of the house, and beginning to add her own touches to rooms that had been functional but lacking in warmth. Weston returned for the midday meal when he could, and always for supper in the evening. During these times, they slowly became acquainted. Adelaide learned that Weston had been born on the ranch, the only son among 3 sisters, all now married and living elsewhere. He had taken over the running of the property when his father died, just as he was turning 23. Now 30, he had built the ranch into one of the most prosperous in the region. In turn, Adelaide shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's business as an importer, the comfortable life they had led until financial ruin struck after her mother's lengthy illness, and her decision to become a mail-order bride rather than accept an unwanted proposal from her father's former business partner. He was nearly 60, she confided one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and had buried 3 wives already, but he offered to clear my father's debts in exchange for marriage. Weston's expression darkened. You made the right choice coming west. Even though my intended groom abandoned me at the altar, his eyes met hers, intensity burning in their blue depths. Especially then, Blackburn would never have deserved you. Something shifted between them in that moment, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Adelaide found herself studying Weston when he wasn't looking, noticing the strength in his hands, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness he showed to animals and the men who worked for him. 2 weeks after their wedding, a summer storm rolled in, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce lightning that spooked the cattle. Weston and the ranch hands worked through the night to prevent a stampede. When he finally returned to the house just before dawn, he was soaked to the skin and exhausted. Adelaide, who had waited up worrying, met him at the door with dry clothes and hot coffee. You're chilled through, she said, concern evident in her voice. You need to get warm before you fall ill. Too tired to argue, Weston allowed her to lead him to a chair by the fire she'd kept burning. She helped him remove his sodden boots and handed him the dry clothing. While he changed behind a screen she discreetly set up, she prepared a simple meal of eggs and leftover bread. You didn't have to wait up, he said, emerging in the dry clothes, his hair still damp but from rain rather than sweat now. Of course I did. You're my husband. The words came naturally, surprising her with their truth. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, their marriage of convenience had begun to feel real. Weston studied her face for a long moment. Thank you, he said quietly. After he ate, exhaustion overtook him. Adelaide insisted he take the master bedroom to rest properly. I'll make sure you're not disturbed, she promised. She was turning to leave when his hand caught hers. Adelaide. The touch of his calloused fingers against her skin sent warmth up her arm. I'm glad you're here. So am I, she replied honestly. As summer progressed into July, the temperatures rose, and so did a tension between them, not unpleasant, but undeniable. Their hands would brush while passing dishes at the table, and neither would pull away immediately. Their evening conversations on the porch lasted longer, sometimes until the stars were fully out. Once, when Adelaide was reaching for a jar on a high shelf in the kitchen, Weston stepped behind her to help, his chest briefly pressing against her back as he stretched to retrieve it. The contact was fleeting but left her breathless. One particularly hot evening, Weston suggested they ride to a swimming hole on the property. The water's cool there, even in summer. It would be a relief from this heat. Adelaide agreed eagerly, changing into a simple dress that wouldn't be ruined by water. Weston saddled 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding and a gentle mare for Adelaide. "Have you ridden before?" he asked as he helped her mount. "A little in the city parks, nothing like this." She gestured to the open country around them. "Daisy will take care of you. She's sure-footed and calm." He adjusted her grip on the reins, his hands lingering on hers longer than necessary. The swimming hole was even more beautiful than Weston had described, a deep pool fed by a small waterfall, surrounded by trees that offered shade from the relentless sun. Adelaide gasped in delight when she saw it. "It's lovely," Weston smiled, pleased by her reaction. "My sisters and I spent every summer day we could here when we were young. My father called it our personal paradise." He turned his back politely while Adelaide waded into the water, her dress hiked up to her knees. The coolness against her skin was heavenly after weeks of heat. "You can come in deeper," Weston called, having removed his boots and rolled up his pant legs. "The bottom is sandy here, not rocky." Adelaide ventured further, laughing as the water swirled around her thighs. Weston watched her, a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're beautiful when you laugh," he said simply. "You should do it more often." The honesty in his words touched her deeply. "I haven't had much cause for laughter in recent years." His expression softened. "I hope you'll find more reasons here." They stayed at the swimming hole until the sun began to set, talking easily about everything and nothing. When they returned to the house, something had changed between them. The distance that had separated them from the beginning had diminished significantly. That night, as Adelaide prepared for bed, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, Weston stood there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to thank you for coming with me today," he said. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed an afternoon like that." "I should be thanking you. It was wonderful." He hesitated, then reached out slowly to touch her cheek. "Good night, Adelaide." "Good night, Weston." After he left, Adelaide pressed her fingers to where his had been, the sensation of his touch lingering on her skin. She was falling in love with her husband, she realized. The thought was both thrilling and frightening. The following week brought the arrival of Weston's oldest sister, Mary, and her husband James, who stopped at the ranch on their way to visit friends further west. Adelaide had been nervous about meeting Weston's family, unsure how they would receive her given the unusual circumstances of the marriage. Her worries proved unfounded. Mary embraced her warmly upon introduction. "I was beginning to think my brother would never find someone to put up with his stubborn ways," she said with a laugh. "Welcome to the family, Adelaide." Over dinner, Mary regaled Adelaide with stories of their childhood on the ranch, much to Weston's apparent embarrassment. "He once tried to lasso a wild Mustang when he was 12, she told Adelaide. "Ended up being dragged through a blackberry patch instead, came home looking like he'd fought with a mountain lion." "That Mustang became one of my best horses eventually," Weston protested, though his eyes danced with amusement. "Only because Pa stepped in and showed you how to approach him properly," Mary countered. Later, while the men discussed business on the porch, Mary helped Adelaide with the dishes. "My brother seems different," she observed, "happier than I've seen him in years." Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest. "We're still getting to know each other." Mary's keen eyes studied her face. "You didn't know him before you married, did you?" At Adelaide's startled look, she smiled. "Small towns have big gossips. Word reaches even California eventually." "No, I didn't," Adelaide admitted. "It was unexpected, but not unwelcome, I think." Mary's tone was gentle. "Weston has always done things his own way. Taking a bride at the altar when another man failed to show that's exactly like him. Honorable to a fault, our Weston." She touched Adelaide's hand. "He looks at you the way our father used to look at our mother. Whatever brought you together, I'm glad it did." That night, after their guests had retired to the spare bedroom, Adelaide and Weston sat alone on the porch. The air between them felt charged, as if a storm were brewing despite the clear sky above. "Your sister is wonderful," Adelaide said. "I can see why you missed her." Weston nodded. "Mary's always been the heart of the family. She writes faithfully every month, but it's not the same as having her here." He paused. "She approves of you, not that she wouldn't have eventually, but it matters to me that she does immediately." Adelaide smiled. "I'm glad." I want your family to accept me. They will. They do. He reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. Adelaide, I know our beginning was unusual, but these past weeks, I've come to care for you more than I expected to. Her heart quickened. I feel the same. Weston shifted closer, his eyes searching hers. May I kiss you, properly this time, not like at the church? In answer, Adelaide leaned toward him. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. His hand cupped her cheek, then slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I've been wanting to do that since the day at the swimming hole, Weston confessed, his voice husky. Adelaide smiled. I've been hoping you would. After Mary and James continued their journey west, the relationship between Weston and Adelaide deepened rapidly. The pretense of separate bedrooms was abandoned as Adelaide moved into the master bedroom with her husband. Their physical relationship blossomed alongside the emotional connection they had built, each discovery bringing them closer together. By August, there was no doubt in either of their minds that what had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into a union of love. They still had much to learn about each other, but the foundation was strong. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Weston took Adelaide's hand. I have something to ask you, he said, an unusual nervousness in his voice. What is it? I know we're already married, but it wasn't what you dreamed of. There was no courtship, no proposal, just a desperate moment in a church. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I want to do this properly now. Inside the box was a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond flanked by sapphires. It was my mother's, Weston explained. I retrieved it from the bank in town yesterday. Tears welled in Adelaide's eyes as Weston knelt before her chair, still holding her hand. Adelaide Campbell Stanton, these past months have shown me what it means to truly love someone. You came into my life unexpectedly, but now I can't imagine a day without you. Will you continue to be my wife, not out of necessity or convenience, but because we choose each other? Yes, Adelaide whispered, her heart so full she could barely speak. Yes, with all my heart. Weston slipped the ring onto her finger alongside the simple band they had used for their hasty wedding. Then he drew her to her feet and into his arms, sealing their renewed vows with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. That fall, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, Adelaide discovered she was with child. The news brought joy to both of them, Weston's face lighting up with wonder when she told him. A baby, he murmured, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. The winter months passed peacefully as they prepared for the new addition to their family. Weston expanded his business interests, investing in a sawmill that would provide additional income beyond the cattle ranch. Adelaide transformed the house more fully into a home, adding touches that reflected their shared life photographs in frames, curtains she sewed herself, furniture rearranged to create a cozy nursery adjacent to their bedroom. In late April of 1886, just as the wildflowers began carpeting the hills around Eureka Springs, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Mary Stanton. With her father's blue eyes and her mother's delicate features, she was perfect in every way. As Weston cradled his daughter for the first time, he looked at Adelaide with such love it nearly overwhelmed her. Thank you, he whispered, for standing beside me at that altar, for taking a chance on a stranger, for giving me a family. Adelaide reached up to touch his face. It was the best decision I ever made. 5 years later, the Stanton Ranch had grown considerably in size and prosperity. Weston had added sheep farming to their cattle business, proving the naysayers wrong when both ventures thrived side by side. Adelaide managed the household accounts with skill, even establishing a small business selling preserves and baked goods in town. Little Elizabeth, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's determination and her mother's grace, had been joined by 3-year-old William and infant Sarah. The house rang with children's laughter, fulfilling the promise of the home Adelaide had sensed when she first arrived. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Weston surprised Adelaide by arranging for Pastor Mitchell, the same man who had married them, to come to the ranch. There, surrounded by their children, friends, and the ranch hands who had become like family, they renewed their vows in a ceremony filled with meaning and memories. "I take you, Adelaide, to be my wife," Weston said, his voice strong and sure. "Not because fate threw us together, but because loving you is the greatest joy of my life." Adelaide, her eyes shining with happy tears, responded in kind. "I take you, Weston, to be my husband, the man who stood up when another stepped away, the man who gave me not just his name but his heart. I choose you today as eagerly as I did 5 years ago, and will continue to choose you every day of our lives." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Adelaide reflected on how differently her life might have turned out had Thomas Blackburn appeared at the church that day in 1885. His absence, once a source of pain and humiliation, now seemed the greatest blessing she had ever received. That evening, after the children were asleep and their guests had departed, Weston and Adelaide stood on the porch of their home, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the stars. "Did I ever tell you," Weston said softly, "that I saw you the day you arrived in Eureka Springs? You stepped off the stagecoach looking so brave and hopeful. I remember thinking Blackburn was a lucky man." Adelaide looked up at him in surprise. "You never mentioned that." He smiled a bit sheepishly. "How could I admit I noticed another man's intended, but when I heard you were to be married, I nearly rode out of town to avoid witnessing it. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing you become his wife." His arm tightened around her. "Then when I rode past the church and saw people gathering outside, whispering, when I realized what had happened. You decided to claim me yourself," Adelaide finished for him, leaning into his embrace. "It was impulsive, the most impulsive thing I've ever done." Weston turned to face her fully. "But standing in that church, offering myself to you, it was also the most right thing I've ever done. From the moment you said yes, I vowed to myself that I would spend my life making sure you never regretted it." Adelaide stretched up to kiss him, her heart as full as it had been on that extraordinary day when a stranger had offered salvation and found love instead. "I never have," she whispered against his lips. "Not for a single moment." As the years passed, the legend of their unusual beginning became a favorite tale in Eureka Springs. People spoke of the abandoned bride and the cowboy who stepped forward, seeing in their story a romantic ideal of the West, a place where second chances and new beginnings were possible, where love could flourish in the most unexpected circumstances. For Weston and Adelaide, however, it was simply their truth, the foundation of a life built on a moment of courage and a leap of faith. A life that, through all its joys and sorrows, proved every day that sometimes the best journeys begin with an unexpected detour. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their grown children, grandchildren, and the community they had helped build, Adelaide found herself remembering that June day so long ago. She caught Weston's eye across the room, and the look they shared held decades of understanding and devotion. Later, as they danced together under lantern light in the same barn where they had celebrated their 5th anniversary, Weston pulled her close. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Blackburn had shown up that day?" he asked, curious rather than insecure after so many years together. Adelaide shook her head, her silver-streaked hair brushing against his shoulder. "No. Because even if he had, I believe we would have found each other eventually. Some things are simply meant to be." Weston smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with his happiness. "Like a mail-order bride and a cowboy who never ordered one." "Exactly like that," Adelaide agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss the man who had been her salvation and her joy, the man who had stood before her at an altar and changed both their destinies with 7 simple words. "Then you'll say your vows to me."